Hello and welcome to another TLDR News EU video. We've recently surpassed 100,000 subscribers and therefore we've received our silver YouTube play button. If you want to see me unboxing it alongside our new US play button, then check out Monday's edition of the Daily Briefing, your daily 3-minute news update. Find the Daily Briefing and the unboxing video linked in the description. Also be sure to subscribe to that channel so that we can update you on the news every single day. So in order to celebrate this huge achievement, we're going to discuss something that's really been pressing in the news and something we're constantly being asked to make a video about: the relationship between the EU and North Korea. Oh wait, huh? Look at that. No one's ever asked us to write about this. Oh, and it's not even in the news. Okay, well, so maybe it's not a video that's highly in demand, but we promise it's interesting. So in this video, we're going to start by looking at this relationship. We'll go into the recent controversy around it, why the EU could be doing more to ease tensions in North Korea, and exactly why their current strategy has failed. Let's start by explaining exactly how the EU has approached the tricky subject of North Korea up until now. It's fairly obvious why you don't regularly, if ever, hear about this relationship. One side originated as a trading bloc, aiming to improve the economic situation across the continent, prevent a third world war, and the creation of another autocratic warmongering state. The other is on the other side of the planet, led by an autocratic regime, and is regularly accused of human rights violations. Neither has any real reason to interact, or at least that's what you'd think. Like any diplomatic nation, Brussels would ideally like to see North Korea as stable from a security standpoint, and would like to see human rights respected. As a huge economic trading bloc, it has a huge amount of power to effect such change. So while theoretically the EU could sit on the sidelines and leave the growing tensions in North Korea to other nations and groups to deal with, such as the US, NATO and UN, it hasn't done this. It's tried to engage with the situation using its considerable power. However, in recent months, scholars have been quick to criticise the EU's role in North Korea. One article by Teresa Novotná of the Friends of Europe think tank has argued that the EU has not gone far enough. She argues that as the US president seems to have lost interest in North Korea, and as little progress is being made by the US in North Korea, the EU should try and fill this vacuum. Pyongyang would see the EU as a more neutral country, and could be willing to negotiate on issues such as denuclearization. She also states that this shouldn't be a foreign concept to the EU. She explains this succinctly by stating that a complete change of the paradigm between parties formerly at war should not be an alien concept to the EU. After all, this is how European integration started. In fact, Eric Bulbach, writing for the Elcano Royal Institute, makes a similar argument. He, however, makes an even bolder statement, that not only is the EU not doing enough, but its current and previous strategies have demonstrably failed and a new approach is needed. In order to understand the arguments presented by both of these papers, a history of the EU and North Korea must first be understood. Fortunately, Bulbach provides a brief history in his paper, which we'll summarise here. He argues that the relationship can be broken down into 3 distinct periods, each with their own distinct approaches. The first is 1995 to 2002, which he claims is the active engagement phase. This is when the EU was most generous and lenient with North Korea. They provided huge sums of money to the North Korean regime to help with food aid, structural food assistance, humanitarian assistance, and technical assistance. And this aid totaled 400 million euros. As can be seen by the reasons the EU gave the money, this was being done for the sake of humanitarian purposes, and is something they continued doing until the early 2010s. In addition to humanitarian aid, the EU also had political dialogue with North Korea, starting in 1998. Between 1998 and 2015, 14 meetings were held between the EU and North Korea, and things appeared to be going well between the EU and North Korea. In fact, a delegation from Europe visited the country to have a special meeting with Kim Jong-il. The purpose of this meeting was to ensure that missile testing would stop, at least until 2003, something that both sides agreed on. However, in the second nuclear crisis of 2002, the Kim Jong-il regime resumed missile testing, undoing this agreement. Therefore, Bulbach argues that the EU went into the second phase of their relationship with North Korea, which he calls critical engagement. This period lasted between 2002 and 2013, and is basically the EU getting harsher. It withdrew its programs designed to aid the North Korean economy and stopped opening its own market to the North Koreans. However, it did still provide aid, most notably in 2011, when €10 million was given to aid the North Korean food crisis. The last and most recent phase is active pressure, and this represented an even further harshening of the EU's stance towards North Korea. The reason behind this likely lay in the new supreme leader, Kim Jong-un's, increased missile testing. A good example of this was the fact that official channels of communication between the EU and North Korea were cut. Although informal channels remained open, the EU effectively stood back from engaging with North Korea. This is further demonstrated by a huge array of sanctions that have been imposed on the country since 2013. This includes a ban on EU member states from transferring funds to and from the DPRK, unless it's for a certain predefined purpose and authorised in advance. And since 2016, a huge array of materials were also banned from being exported from the EU to North Korea, including iron, coal, electrical equipment, machinery, and seafood. So this is ballpark summary of the EU-North Korean relationship over the last 2 decades. His criticism of the approach by the EU is that it's lackluster. It does not foster engagement between the EU and North Korea, and it doesn't utilise the unique position that the EU is in. And this is an opinion that seems to be shared by Teresa Novotná. But before we explain exactly what they both think the EU should do in relation to North Korea, let's look at why Ballbach thinks that the EU has failed with its approach. He argues that the EU has failed for 2 main reasons: that their goals haven't been met, reducing tension in the Korean peninsula and improving the human rights situation, and their policies have led to a diminished role for the EU, bordering on irrelevancy. So firstly, have tensions in North Korea been high, and is the humanitarian situation bad? Well, let's just take a look at some tweets and news headlines, and I'll let you judge for yourself. Yeah. Okay, it's fair to say that the EU imposing some sanctions on North Korea hasn't really worked in easing tensions. So what about the EU's other objective, about the human rights situation? Well, earlier this week, a report was published by Human Rights Watch that looked into the conditions in prisons in North Korean pre-trial. This paper was entitled "Worse Less Than an Animal," so that should give you an idea of what tone the report took. The report includes interviews with 22 North Koreans that were detained following the ascension of Kim Jong-un to the position of supreme leader. It also includes the accounts of 8 former officials who fled the country. As we can't summarise the entire report here, we'd recommend giving it a flick through. It's genuinely harrowing and well worth the read. One of the stories mentioned in the report is that of Lim Ok-kyung, who was detained for importing home appliances from China. As her husband had good connections to the party, she was released after only 10 days, but her experience was still brutal. She was beaten repeatedly during questioning, and then told to write down everything about herself, apparently from the moment of her birth until the present. The following day, a guard came in, told her that it was all made up, beat her, and then told her to do it all over again. Following this, she was made to stand up in her cell for 5 days, refused any sleep. In fact, this paragraph of the report summarises the experiences of those involved. It's clear, therefore, that the human rights situation in North Korea hasn't improved much either. Neither the de-escalation of tension nor the improvements in human rights have been successful, and therefore, Ballbach seems right that the EU have failed in their objectives. As for the second reason why their policy has failed, it's clear that the EU doesn't have much influence over North Korea anymore. This, according to Ballbach, is because the EU insists on complete nuclear disarmament before formal discussions can resume. As the EU has virtually no diplomatic clout in this area, it's effectively shot itself in the foot. It does not have the power to insist that nuclear disarmament happens, and will not talk until this does happen. The EU's power in this area is therefore weakened due to its policy. So what do Ballbach and Novotná argue is the approach that the EU should take? Well, both argue that an increased dialogue would greatly improve not only their standing in the region, but also the stability of the region more generally. the EU is in a position where it can talk to both the US and North Korea, and could end up arbitrating in a dispute. Novotny argues that Brussels should, together with Berlin, come up with an independent blueprint for the North Korean peninsula that will be seen as neutral and objective by Pyongyang. There's no doubt that the DPRK negotiators would be thrilled. Bulbach additionally demonstrates that Sweden has already, independently, held high-level meetings between the US and North Korea, and allowed for additional dialogue between regimes. He also argues that such meetings are useful for understanding the motives and objectives of North Korea, and that this in turn would improve trust. In the longer term, this makes the EU less dependent on the relationship between the US and North Korea, or South Korea and North Korea, because a level of trust could be built up independently of these relationships. But what do you think? Could this foster a more stable region? Or could this backfire and make it look like the EU is helping an undemocratic and authoritarian regime? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified every time we release more videos like this one. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this possible. And if you want to see your name at the end of the video, then check out the link to our Patreon in the description.